Facebook and other platforms, I do want to give a moment in order for folks to be able to join us and to let you know that this session is being recorded and available for follow-up. You can reach us via freepress.net or via email at racialjustice@freepress.net. Again, good morning. My name is Colette Watson, and I'm Vice President of Cultural Strategy at Free Press and a member of the Media 2070 team. So we'll wait just a few more moments to allow folks to be able to join us live via Facebook. We're also utilizing the Zoom platform today. And if you do have questions, you can use the raise hand function here in Zoom in order to ask them. Thank you for being with us. So as we move to begin, I'd like to welcome Representative Jamaal Bowman of New York, who led yesterday's letter to the FCC, along with Representatives Yvette Clarke and Brenda Lawrence, calling on the Federal Communications Commission to conduct a racial equity assessment to understand how its policies have historically impacted Black communities and other communities of color. This letter also echoes a call from the Media 2070 project, which I'd like to tell you a little bit more about. Conceived and led by the Black Staff Caucus at Free Press, Media 2070 is an emergent multiracial consortium and campaign that advocates for reparations for the Black community for harms that the media and tech companies have inflicted on Black lives throughout US history. Media 2070 also calls on policymakers and philanthropists to redress policies and practices that have baked inequities into our media system. We see media reparations as both a process and a destination that builds momentum for broader efforts around reckoning, restitution, and the racial healing we sorely need. The only media reparations project in the United States, Media 2070 launched the effort in 2020 with an essay titled Media 2070, An Invitation to Dream Up Media Reparations. This 100-page essay examines the history of anti-Black racism in the US media system. And the essay makes the case for media reparations while prompting visions of what media equality and justice would look and feel like. It was cited by the Columbia Journalism Review as among the best journalism covering race in 2020. And Media 2070's growing consortium of 30 partners is organizing visionary events, presentations, press outreach, and attracting widespread attention to this cause. Many of our consortium members may be joining here today, and I say welcome to you. So this year we aim to continue joining with communities and movements to revolutionize the public narrative on race and the media. Under the leadership of Alicia Bell, Joseph Torres, and myself at Free Press, we'll build power, launch campaigns, and hold newsrooms accountable while advancing policies to radically transform who has the capital to tell their own stories by 2070. This morning, as I mentioned, we are pleased to welcome Representative Jamaal Bowman of New York, who on yesterday led a letter to the Federal Communications Commission calling for a racial equity assessment. And at this time, I'd like to invite Representative Bowman to share a few remarks with us this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Peace and love to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. A huge shout out to Media 2070 for the work that you all are doing. Huge shout out to you, Ms. Watson, for your leadership, to you, Mr. Torres, as well, for your leadership. It was my honor to lead that letter to the FCC yesterday. As we all know, we're dealing with and going through a racial reckoning in our country since the murder of George Floyd, and even going back further to the murder of Eric Garner and many other things that continue to happen in Black and brown communities across the country. We are living through that racial reckoning. And this is a time for us to go through a process of truth and collective healing and looking at and assessing our systems and America's institutions to see where there is racial bias and racial injustice taking place. And unfortunately, when we look at our communications infrastructure, this has been going on for quite some time. Just like in housing, just like in other aspects of corporate America, just like in education. But this is our moment. You know, President Biden very early on called for all of our government agencies to conduct a racial equity audit. Even though the FCC is an independent agency, they were strongly encouraged to do so. And in my communications with the leader of the FCC, she is more than ready, willing, and able to do so. And this is essential because we're talking about who gets the licenses in our communications apparatus, who gets the contracts, where do the ad buys go and come from, and how Black and Brown media can own its own media, truly own its own media, and tell its own stories. As we know, the media has a tremendous impact on the conversations we have at the dinner table and in our workplaces. It has a tremendous impact on how we think about ourselves, each other, and the extended world. And it has a tremendous impact on how people think about Black and Brown people and Black and Brown communities. And as a former educator, I worked in public education for 20 years. I always think about my students, and I think about my own children and how they see themselves in our media. And I think about my daughter, who's a brown-skinned girl growing up in America with beautiful hair and beautiful complexion and beautiful eyes and beautiful features. Yet when I click on Netflix or Amazon and I try to find a cartoon with a protagonist that looks like her, who is powerful, who is smart, who is clever, who is out there saving the world, it's very hard for me to find shows like that. And that has a tremendous impact on me, but it also has an impact on her and who she's identifying with as she grows up in America as a Black girl in America. So it's personal for me when I think about my daughter. It's personal as I think about our students. And as I think about how we consume media and all the ways we consume media, from social media to television, to the internet, to radio, to advertisements on billboards. We consume it in every aspect of our lives. And the bottom line is communities of color have been left out, and Black communities in particular have suffered from not being at the table and really being a part of the conversation in terms of how our media should be constructed, designed, and implemented in our country. So it was my honor to lead that letter in collaboration with Media 2070, and let's continue to do good work together.
Thank you so much, Representative Bowman. Yes, let's continue to do good work together. We're very, very grateful to you for your leadership here and on so many issues. And we appreciate you taking the time to be here this morning, understanding you're very, very, very busy. I do want to right now open up the opportunity for anyone who is on the line with us to ask questions. Again, we're using the Zoom platform, and you actually can use the raise hand feature in order to chime in with questions for Representative Bowman. So I want to give a moment right now for people to be able to use that feature, and also for our team to be able to gather any questions that may be coming in from other platforms. And while we are giving a moment for folks to be able to chime in, Representative Bowman, you spoke very eloquently about some of the people in your life, your daughter, who motivate many of your thoughts around these issues of media policy. I did want to ask you, in terms of looking at the FCC and our ask for a racial equity assessment, and thinking about your community there in New York, how do you feel this issue applies, particularly for the folks living and working and looking to thrive in communities there in New York?
Yeah, so it's about agency. It's about belonging and control and power, and it's about telling our stories. I represent a very diverse district, a very segregated district, and a very separated district. If my district were a country, we would have the 8th worst economic inequality in the world. When you look, if you're Black or brown in my district, you are more likely to live in poverty, have asthma, and suffer from the comorbidities that lead to COVID deaths. If you're white in my country, you're more likely to be upper middle class, wealthy, and live in much better conditions. This falls along the history in our country of redlining Black communities. And it's just a social imbalance, an economic imbalance, and a power imbalance. But many throughout the country don't hear about our stories and don't know what's going on in districts like mine across the country. Many of my constituents and former students are passionate about storytelling and passionate about media and passionate about technology. But in terms of the infrastructure and in terms of a pipeline to become involved and engaged and empowered within that space, it currently does not exist. And it's on the FCC and many of America's institutions that have been historically discriminatory against communities of color to conduct assessments like this so they could identify the gaps, identify why the disparities continue to exist, and then invest in and build the infrastructures in places like, the Bronx, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, and New Rochelle, where I represent, that have large Black communities who have been ignored and don't have the resources to lift themselves up. And the worst part about it is someone else is talking about them as opposed to us leading and telling our own stories in those spaces.
Absolutely. We have a saying on our team, nothing about us without us. And I think that what you're saying really encapsulates that, and the idea that it is time for communities of color, underrepresented communities, to be able to control and own our own narratives. And I think that would go a long way in terms of our broader concerns around racial equity and justice and existing as a multiracial society. So I'm very grateful again for your leadership, for you being here with us today, and want to let folks know that you can also use the Q&A feature here on Zoom to be able to submit your questions. We did have one that came in basically just asking, what are the next steps from here now that this letter has been sent to the FCC?
So there's going to be a very assertive push within the Democratic caucus in Congress for my colleagues to sign on in support of this letter and to begin to brainstorm ideas for legislation in support of more equity in our media spaces. So that's happening, a huge organizing inside push in Congress, because the more people that sign on, the more attention it gets, and the more momentum it gives us to make sure this racial equity audit happens, efficiently and is very comprehensive. There's also going to be an outside push. So we are in touch with many influencers, people who work in the media spaces, particularly Black and brown media spaces, who support this letter to organize so we could begin to have the outside strategy and outside pressure on leadership from the White House to the House to the Senate to ensure that this gets done in an efficient manner. So there's an inside-outside game happening here. This is not a one-off where we send a letter and there's no work to be done after that. The work is going to continue throughout the summer and into the fall. We have several calls set up this week to begin that process. So that's what's happening now, the inside-outside strategy to push for the equity audit. And then when it happens, because we know what we're gonna find, we're gonna find racial injustice. So once we find it, what do we do about it? And that's where the organizing, both on the outside and inside, is gonna come to bear even stronger as we go forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Representative Bowman. And thank you for that question, Mira Zendro. We do have one more question if you have time. Tim Carr is asking, how do people get involved in supporting this effort?
So great. So wherever you are in the country, please call your representative and your US Senator to ask them to support this effort. That is key. Please contact the FCC to also ask them to move forward with this effort and tell them that you support it and why. And also contact the White House to inform them that you support this effort as well. I said you can make a phone call, but you can also write a letter, send an email, and get friends and family and other grassroots organizations involved who support racial justice in any of its forms. See, we can no longer move in silos. In order for us to become the multiracial democracy that we are, where everyone is empowered and meet the ideals of our Constitution and our democracy, we need to work in an integrated, collaborative, cooperative way. So if you care about racial justice and you care about a multiracial democracy that works for everyone, regardless if it's focused on housing, education, or something else, you can get involved in this issue and you can let leadership here in Congress know that you support this issue as well.
If I can, if I may ask a quick question, if I may, Colette, when we're dealing with like racial reckonings, as we are in this country, when it comes to systemic racism, and what we're so appreciative of the letter that you led, Congressman. How far back do you go? I mean, how far back do you go to addressing the history of harm? Because too often, I think the concern is that while representation in DEI initiatives are important, how do you grasp with the structural harm and the history of how an agency like the FCC and the inequities came into formation?
Yeah, great question. So I start with the present. And I look at what's happening present day and the outcomes and the disparities we see and the disparities that exist in our present day, in our everyday lives, right? Like it's clear to see them, whether we're looking at through the lens of media or healthcare or housing or education, disparities are there. So then the next question is like, damn, why do these disparities exist? And why do they persist? Right? Despite the passage of voting rights legislation, civil rights legislation, and other key legislation throughout American history, why do these disparities persist? And I make the argument that these disparities persist because we haven't done the historical accounting and reckoning that needs to be done in order to change the outcomes of the present day. So we have to go back, because as we go back, we get a better understanding of what happened, and we have to tell those stories so that the people in this country can understand there's a story, there's an American narrative that got us to this point, to where we are, right? How do we get there? What went wrong? And how do we right those wrongs in the present day so that we don't repeat these wrongs as we go forward? So, there are certain policies that took place throughout the history of the FCC that were very clearly discriminatory, that need to be highlighted. But as we talk about racial reckoning overall, I mean, man, we could go back as far as, when we were colonies and the head right system, to the Homestead Act, to the New Deal, to other policies that were blatantly racist and discriminatory. And I think it's all important to tell the story of America and how, listen, we've invested in our country along racial lines to build America into what it is today. It's just Black and brown people were kept out of those conversations and kept away from those resources. And that has to change. So we have to tell the whole story.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that question, Joe. We did have another question come in, just asking if you could.
Goodness. we got one more question. We got another question. I got you. I'm with you. Well, however long you need me, I'm good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so relieved. I froze for a moment. I know we're very appreciative. And this person just asked, and you touched on this earlier, Congressman, but they asked if you could say a bit more about what you hope to see from the FCC in response to this letter that you led, and also a little bit about the response of your colleagues, which I do want to give a shout out in this moment to Representative Yvette Clarke and Representative Brenda Lawrence, who co-led this letter with you. They weren't able to join us this morning. And there were 25 in total lawmakers on that letter. But what was the response of your colleagues as you brought forward this idea of studying the history of discrimination in media policy.
Yeah, so shout out to the entire Congressional Black Caucus for supporting us in the writing of this letter. Shout out to Chairwoman Joyce Beatty and her leadership on this issue, and for allowing me as a freshman in Congress to, sort of spread my wings a bit and take a leadership role on writing this letter. So I appreciate her mentorship and everything she is to me personally. I want to also shout out, Assistant Speaker Catherine Clark, who is going to become a champion of this issue for us and really help us to push it throughout the caucus. So that is all huge and gives us great momentum. What I would love to see is when we talk about media, when we talk about advertising, when we talk about contracts, when we talk about licenses, I would like to see not disproportionality, but proportionality, licenses to the percentage of African Americans who live in the country, for example, right? If there's 15% of us who live in the country, let's have 15% of the media licenses, and continuing along those lines for other groups who are historically left out and marginalized. And what happens there is you'll see more ownership, more opportunities, and more storytelling that comes from communities historically neglected and historically ignored. That's what I want to see. I want to see more diversity on my screen, not just in terms of racial and ethnic diversity, but in terms of just the ideas that will come with that. You take a brilliant movie like Midnight. A movie like that isn't made without diversity in media, and there's just so much more to come, and so much more that can be a part of that. So just a more balancing of the scales, if you will, just making sure everyone has an opportunity to share in the wealth that media creates for so many people and communities, but then also to when the stories are told, people have a better understanding of how the world really is and works in truth, not in propaganda. And not in lies, and that's what we want to live and exist within. We want to exist within truth, so that the bad actors out there don't use media to manipulate how we think about each other in the world, but we can deal with it as it truly exists.
As it truly exists, indeed. Thank you, Congressman Bowman. And I just want to thank all the folks who have asked questions here today. And as we move to wrap up this segment, is there anything else that you wanted to make sure that you say to us with the release of this letter and this really important moment as we strive for a more just society and media system?
No, just peace and love to you. Thank you for being partners with us in writing this letter. And to everyone out there, continue to engage in this conversation and other conversations that may be uncomfortable and difficult, and continue to organize in your communities and push for a more equitable and just society in all of its forms, not just in media and communications, but in every form. So thank you all so much.
Thank you too, Representative Bowman. We're very grateful. And to the points that you were making, I want to share with folks who are watching that we are actually in partnership with many other groups, including Hollywood for Black Lives, many creators, journalists, media makers, and just various folks who understand the impact that media has on our perceptions and how it creates the conditions of our lives. And is so foundational to so many other arenas in which we're fighting for a more just society and world, whether it be climate, housing, the criminal legal system, all of these systems that impact and shape our lives and have represented sites of oppression historically for Black folks and other communities. These are all shaped in terms of the ways that we select who our leaders are and what policies have value by the conditions that media creates. So again, we appreciate Representative Bowman and his colleagues for leading on this particular letter and look forward to the FCC taking action. Thank you so much, Representative Bowman.
Thank you so much. Peace and love, everyone. Have a good day.
You as well. You as well. And at this time, I'd like to introduce to you our next speaker on this press briefing and just remind you that you are watching a briefing from Media 2070 at Free Press. We are the Media Reparations Project. And on yesterday, Representative Jamaal Bowman, who was just with us, led a letter to the FCC in which congressional leaders call for a racial equity assessment in order to understand how media-related policies have impacted and harmed Black communities and other communities of color throughout the history of the United States. I have a foremost historian, speaking of history, about to join us, my colleague Joseph Torres, who advocates in Washington to ensure that our nation's media policies serve the public interest, while also building coalitions to broaden the movement for media justice and its base. Joseph writes frequently on media and internet issues and is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, News for All the People, The Epic Story of Race in the American Media, co-author along with Juan Gonzalez. Joe, I would like to turn to you now for a few remarks on what it is that we are looking for and what's at stake. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Colette. I'm so appreciative of the congressman and him being with us. Yeah, we have to reckon with the long history of exclusion. The FCC has a policy, historically have a policy of exclusion, of racism, that has prevented people of color from owning our nation's infrastructure. Remember, these are public airwaves, right? Or when we talk about cable, these are our streets that we dig up for the cable companies to lay their pipes down. It is a public good that's being used, and historically has been used in the narratives that are told about the Black community to further harm. So when we think about the history of our country and how segregation and policies of exclusion have worked, all the first broadcast licenses that were given out for free for starting with radio in 1927, the Federal Radio Commission, then the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, founded in 1934, were given to white owners for free to broadcast radio licenses. And so when you think about the wealth in which the white owners were able to create to become the first owners of television stations, and those first owners of television stations are able to amass wealth and further consolidate an industry in all the most powerful stations. And so in the late 1960s, the FCC, Congress and the FCC in the 1970s tried to start addressing this. There was equal employment opportunities rules passed in the late 1960s to try to make sure the newsroom were more representative. The broadcast stations in 1978, the FCC passes regulations to try to increase minority ownership by people of color through a tax certificate program. That led to the first modest increase of ownership by people of color from 1% to 3%. But in 1995, that program, Congress ended that program, passed legislation to end it. And we know that consolidation harms ownership by people of color and by Black folks. So the 1990s, consolidation started happening more and more, starting in the 80s, but 1996, the 1996 Telecom Act, which is the 25th anniversary this year, further just allowed massive consolidation, allowed radio, there was no national ownership limits on radio ownership. It went from 40, you can own 40 stations in 1996, but companies like at that time Clear Channel and iHeartRadio went from owning 40 stations to 1,200 stations in a matter of a couple of years. The cap was increased on the number of stations, broadcast stations you can own nationally. And this harmed the gains made by people of color and Black folks in owning broadcast stations. And so today, and I'll finish with this, when we think about our media landscape, and Congress is talking about parity, right? When it comes to ownership, people of color make about 40% or more of the population, around 40%. And yet 6% of our nation's full power TV stations are owned by people of color, less than 1% by Black owners. 7% of our commercial FM stations are owned by people of color, 2% for Black owners, and 12% of our commercial AM stations are owned by people of color, 3% for Black owners. Again, when you have media consolidation and you have a historical lack of wealth in the community, because of the history of racism policy and the extraction of wealth, it's going to be hard. The barriers to become an owner are just that much more difficult. So the FCC policy of allowing for further consolidation has harmed the ability of ownership of nations, communications infrastructure. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the depth of knowledge and analysis and brilliance that you bring to this work. I do at this time want to invite folks who are watching live or here with us on the Zoom platform to ask questions. While we have Joe here, there is a Q&A function that you have in the Zoom platform, and we're also taking questions from the comment section on Facebook. But thank you again for that. And I believe, Joe, that you're going to hang on with us while we hear from Media 2070 Director Alicia Bell, correct? All right, sounds good. Well, thank you again, Joe. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you my colleague, Alicia Bell. Alicia is a child of ancestors from Mississippi and the Carolinas, working at the intersections of Afrofuturist imagination, journalism, land, food, and all the spaces in between. With Free Press, they organize communities around information equity and power sharing in an effort to transform the future of journalism to one that's more community rooted. Alicia Bell currently is the director of the Media 2070 Media Reparations Project at Free Press. And I'd like to welcome Alicia now to share a few remarks about that project and its vision. Alicia, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much, Colette. And I appreciate you lifting up my ancestors and the lands that I come from. Because as I move into this work, I'm a Southerner, born, raised in my heart and my ancestry. And in this, I'm sure this is true across all different kinds of places. But what I know about the South is that when we see a problem, we figure out how to fix it. And that's the work that we're doing with Media 2070. We saw and we continue to see that there is a problem. There is a problem with the ways that Black and Brown communities are served and interacting with and being able to own and steward our stories from ideation to production and distribution. We saw that that problem had years of roots. And so it makes sense to solve it. And we know that this is a conversation around media and equity and racism that's been going on for over 100 years. It's something that has been lifted up at a governmental level, at a local level for every 50 years via commissions, via the Kerner Commission, the Chicago Commission on Race, and currently. And so when we think about the future of media, we don't want to have the same conversation that we've had for the past 100 years. We're ready to make some interventions that get us off of that hamster wheel. And I'm so excited to be able to partner and amplify the work of the Congress members in this letter. Media 2070 is a living archive of histories and of speculative journalism that figures out how to get us to the futures of media that we deserve, the futures of media where everybody thrives. It is also a consortium of partners and individual activists moving to make that future real. So I want to encourage everyone who's listening, who's joining in, to look more into joining that conversation. You can do that at mediareparations.org or media2070.org. There's several different ways to get involved with this work. We have a vision of a world where everyone thrives, where everyone has access to their dreams. And what we know is that culture is the forest floor that makes everything else possible. And news media, journalism, technology, entertainment media, all of the different kinds of medias that make up our media system are a part of that forest floor, are a part of that culture bearing. And so in order to have the futures and the realities we know are possible in our homes, in our transportation systems, in our environment, we have to shift the media system now. So we're ready to make those interventions. You can join in on this letter to the FCC by signing a petition. You could do that at bit.ly/stopmediaracism. The S, M, and R are all capitalized. So that's bit.ly/stopmediaracism. And to just be a part of this ongoing conversation, you can join us at media2070.org. I'm so excited to be able to gather with you all and move this work forward in this way.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And I want to repeat what they just shared, that you can sign a petition to join in this effort. We did have a question earlier about how people can get involved. To sign that petition, it's bit.ly/stop media racism. Thank you again, Alicia, for your leadership and brilliance in this work. And I do want to, again, open up the floor for any questions using the Q&A feature here on the Zoom platform or in the comments for those who are tuning into the live stream on Facebook. As we move into the question and answer section, I do also want to let any of our members of the press who may be joining today and may be interested in following up with deeper questions, let you know that you can contact our communications and strategy director, Timothy Carr, at 201-533-8838. And for those who may just be joining us, my name is Colette Watson, and we are the Media 2070 Project, here today conducting a briefing on a letter yesterday sent by congressional leaders to the Federal Communications Commission calling for a racial equity assessment in order to understand how media-related policies have harmed communities of color and Black communities particularly through history and into the present day. We do have a question that has come in via the Q&A section here on Zoom, and I encourage folks to continue asking questions. We'll be finishing up here in a couple minutes, but we have a question for you both, Alicia and Joe. So you've spoken about previous efforts to address racism in the media and where they've fallen short. How do we make it different this time? And what about this particular political moment suggests it could be different and that a new path is possible?
You know, I'm just so thankful that we've, as much as it's disheartening that those efforts have fallen short, it's amazing for us to be in this time now because we get to learn from it. And we get to learn from where things worked and worked well and where they didn't. We get to see who was involved in the various commissions and who wasn't. This is one of the reasons why we're focusing on reparation, on reparative justice for media, because we know that any of the individual tactics, to Representative Bowman earlier was talking about how we can't work in silos anymore. We also know that the future of this work can't only be in the individual tactics we take on. It can't only be in pipelines. It can't only be in recommendations. It can't only be in what our representation looks like in our newsroom. We have to have full reparative justice. And so to do that, we are learning from all of these initiatives. We're learning from all of our media ancestors who have taken on this work, who have done the work of moving us to where we are now, who have made it so that Black folks could be in newsrooms that serve mainstream public. To the Black folks who have created media maroonage sites and created new realities, we're learning from and building with those folks. And so I am just thankful that we're able to bring those folks together. And I think bringing together of community activists, media makers, journalists, technologists, lawyers, I think that's going to be one of the biggest game changers for how we move forward. And the fact that we're moving through this reparative lens, holding that we need acknowledgement, we need reckoning, we need accountability, we need redress. Moving through that lens, I think will take us to a different place than we've ever been before.
You know, I'll just add to that question that the idea of, as you mentioned a few times on this call, Colette, is about this is the democracy fight, right? This is the fight whether a multiracial democracy is possible, and if we are successful in creating reparative policies that even gets to parity that Congressman Bowman is talking about, what his initial thoughts are. The media system would fundamentally change into an actual media system that serves everyday people. Now, it will better serve the news and information needs of the Black community and other communities of color, but we're having this debate about the future of journalism, the future, and if we create policies that leads to this reparative future, it will be the media system it will create the media system that actually is needed and to make sure folks are informed and and have the news and information that they need in their local communities to understand what's going on in this world. The congressman also did that too as well. And also, if we believe journalism, as I do and others folks, journalism that actually serves everyday people is critical to a democracy, right? If we talk about journalism and democracy are interlinked all the time, then the country will become every day something different in the future, in the future where people of color can make up the majority of the population, and if these inequities exist, it's going to actually hurt not just Black folks and people of color, but it's going to hurt everyday people as well. And so this is critically needed. The policy, the structural change is needed. It's not just in this industry, but we see all the different sectors that are addressing the inequities in our society. And this is all a part of the struggle for a more just media system and a more just world. I'll just stop there. I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Joe. Absolutely. We do believe that a more just media system is foundational to a just world. And so very much appreciate your work and Alicia's work as well, as leaders of the Media 2070 project. As we do move to close today, I do just invite folks, if you do have another question, to submit that. And want to remind you that Media 2070 is an emergent multiracial consortium, as Alicia described, and you can learn more about our work at Media 2070, that's media2070.org. And there you can learn about some of our efforts throughout this year, as well as the essay that we released in October of 2020, a 100-page essay, which lays out examples and historical incidents from the realm of anti-Black racism related to the media system, and also begins dreaming and visioning what media reparations could be. And so I want to thank Joseph and Alicia and the entire Media 2070 team and the entire team at Free Press for all of your work on this effort, including on this briefing today. Again, we send appreciations to Representative Jamaal Bowman of New York, who joined us earlier, and to his colleagues, Representatives Yvette Clarke and Brenda Lawrence, for their co-leadership of the letter, which was released yesterday to the Federal Communications Commission. If you'd like to read that letter and go a little bit more in depth into our perspective and what we're asking for from the FCC, you can visit freepress.net/news. And there's also a report out there. And so I want to right now just give people a little bit of background, though, on why we're asking the FCC to conduct this racial equity assessment. As my colleagues mentioned, there's a long history of exclusion of Black communities. And right now, FCC policies are a primary reason why structural inequities exist in our nation's media and telecommunications systems. And when we're talking about policies, we're talking license decisions, deregulation, inaction on various proceedings. All of these have had the result of effectively excluding people of color from media ownership opportunities. As Joe described earlier, the first radio and TV licenses were awarded to basically exclusively to white men freely, because we were, of course, at that time in the 1920s and 30s at the height of the Jim Crow era of segregation, in this country. And so what that means is that anti-Black racism and exclusion of people of color is baked into the DNA of our media system. Right now, what that has wrought is that people of color own and control just 6% of our nation's full power TV stations and 7% of commercial FM radio stations, 12% of AM stations, despite the fact that people of color make up more than 40% of the US population. Listen to that mathematical disparity. And that is why we here at Free Press at Media 2070 Project have undertaken the effort of unearthing the history of harms, untold stories, what has been left out of our narrative here in this country, and how that has allowed for the perpetuation of myths of Black inferiority and criminality and so many other myths that undermine the ability of Black folks and other people of color to live full lives, to be able to move about freely and be self-determined and fully pursue our full futures for ourselves and our families and loved ones. And so we do have one last question that I want to make time for that has come in. Do you think there's a connection between broadcast media ownership and the economy-wide conversation about how monopolies in any part of the economy reinforce racial inequity. What can we do to connect the anti-monopoly movement to what's happening in media ownership, especially as media monopolies like iHeartRadio and Liberty Media are also operating in the digital space where the FCC doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction?
I agree with that question. There's a famous book that was written, I believe, 40 years from now, that it was a really critical book in the struggle for a just media system called Media Monopoly, right? And yeah, the monopolization, the media has historically done a poor job of covering issues of business and monopoly because of what the question is alluding to, is stating basically itself. It's like even when we're thinking about newspapers, newspapers used to have like cover unions and have covering working class issues, and now we have business sections that that treat business owners as as like heroes, as heroic figures in our democracy, right? I mean, just look up all look, Donald Trump himself is a media, is very is a media creation in so many ways, right? And so yeah, if I'm answering this question, if I understand the question, is like this needs to be included. Free press, we have talked about media monopoly for a long time, right? But we have to, and right now there's a debate around Facebook and the monopolization of the online social media space, right? But yeah, Comcast and all these big cable companies, and they are there's always this technical definition of a monopoly, like legal definition, whatever that is. But we know that they a political role in monopolizing these platforms of us being able to get our stories out and whose stories is where they're being told, right? And so yes to that question. I hope I answered it correctly, but it's like but yeah, yes, this is a part of it should be, in my opinion, part of the whole monopoly discussions. The media, Sinclair's and all that, but it may not fall technically under a monopoly in the legal sense, but in my opinion, they have an oversized role in shaping media ecosystem. So I'll keep it there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. And I think that probably our biggest strategy as the Media 2070 project in addressing that and undoing monopoly is solidarity. We are building solidarity with many movements when we, as I mentioned earlier, talk about housing justice, the criminal legal system, and how we're looking to abolish and also many other areas. And that includes the anti-monopoly movement. And so for us, it's about building solidarity, whether that's people within newsrooms, building solidarity with one another, and people in communities building solidarity around these issues, visibilizing media as a system that oppresses and that harms communities and has done so historically. I think also when we talk about the anti-monopoly movement, it's important to understand what are the impacts of media monopoly. We see it as a public health issue among many other lenses. We understand that narratives are politicized and used to perpetuate myths of Black people as, for instance, a burden on society or inherently criminal in some way, and many other lies and falsehoods about Black humanity that when they are perpetuated and politicized, shape policy and convince people that certain leaders and candidates for public office are desirable, right? Based upon, and regressive policies are desirable based upon these myths. And so we think that it's important to understand how, for instance, during the COVID pandemic, these types of policies, my colleague Joe wrote about this, led to the erosion of the social safety net over many years, which absolutely could have impacted the ways that this country was prepared to respond to a COVID-19 pandemic and could have mitigated its disproportionate impact on communities of color, the ways that we understand what is the responsibility of leadership and the public sector to our communities, what public safety even means, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention the violence that happens when hate and hateful narratives are allowed to proliferate via our broadcast airwaves, which are the public's airwaves. So we see it as an issue, of course, of anti-monopoly, of public health, and so many other lenses. And we're working to continue to build that solidarity so that it becomes common sense to understand that we have to undo media harm and we have to repair the harms that have taken place if we are going to be able to achieve a just society and so many of the aims of our partners and allies and movement spaces. Thank you so much for that question. And thank you to everyone who chimed in with questions here today. Much appreciation to Joseph Torres and to Alicia Bell of the Media 2070 Project, along with Representative Jamaal Bowman, who joined us earlier. And I just want to remind folks that if you would like to follow up with us, you can reach us via email at racialjustice@freepress.net. You can also visit media2070.org, and there you'll be able to learn about our ongoing efforts. In particular, the letter that was released just yesterday calling on the Federal Communications Commission to conduct a racial equity assessment. That letter, led by Representatives Bowman, Clark, and Lawrence, and including 25 of their colleagues from the U.S. House of Representatives. And we look forward to continued work to make that real at the FCC. Thank you all so much. And we will see you at freepress.net, media2070.org, and of course, all the places you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Media2070. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Colette.